Hello, everybody, and welcome to the reality show. I've got Marco and Richard and Michael with me today, and we're going to be discussing what a potential second term Trump presidency holds for foreign policy. Particularly, we're going to be focusing on Israel, what we think might happen there, what developments might happen, maybe with reference back to what happened in the first Trump term, and then maybe we're going to broaden it out and have a think about what's going to happen on the international stage and reflect on what would happen in any potential handover from Biden and the real mess of foreign policy that Biden's made. So, Michael, I'll come to you first since you spend part of your time in America, but Trump, I think is viewed probably as having been a pro-Israel president, certainly in relation to probably Biden and what he said around Israel. There was obviously the notable moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem, which I think a lot of people who are pro-Israel viewed as a very good thing, fundamental. It's a symbolic gesture, but a recognition of legitimacy from Israel that they have the right to have their capital in Jerusalem. So I think a lot of people view that as a very good thing. But then at the same time, I don't want this just to be a rag fest on Trump necessarily, but I think there are certain things which have been a bit more negative. So how much for you?
Can you guys hear me? I
We
apologize.
can, yes, yeah.
Yeah, look, I think he helped foster the Abraham Accords. Um, the main problem with Trump is he talks a lot and he puts his foot into a lot of very good things. And I think it's a bit ironic that we consider Trump a politician who doesn't do what he says or spouts off without thinking, which he probably does more of than most people, but all politicians lie a lot of the time. Um, in fact, most of the time. And we saw it with Biden, who told people not to attack Israel after October 7th. Don't. The implied threat, and Hezbollah did just that. And there's been nothing done about the north in Israel, and it's frankly a disaster. Iran also was told don't, and they immediately did. And then Biden didn't do anything when Israel was attacked by Iran. In fact, he told Israel that defending against 350 missiles was a success. This, as I've said before on the show, this would be the first time a defense against a missile attack would be considered a successful military operation in and of itself. As end discussion, we're done with this. We're not going to do anything else. Trump, I think, does say a lot of things, and I think we really would all do well to try to take most of what he says with a grain of salt and focus primarily on his actions. I personally do not believe that Hamas would have attacked Israel if we had Trump as president, because I think people believe that Donald Trump is a little bit on the edge, and he would be very happy to go in and shoot missiles at people and knock them out. He put a red line in Syria. I believe it was, and unlike Obama's red line, which was chemical warfare, which Assad, of course, perpetrated, and then, of course, the typical Obama red line was crossed and laughed at, and nothing happened. In Trump's case, there were red lines crossed in Syria, and he sent 30 or 40 cruise missiles in from one of our submarines, and he knocked them out completely. He just pushed the button and it was taken care of, and nobody, there was the usual crap that was talked about, but bottom line is nobody was willing to come after America after that, because they figured that Trump was going to use the trillion-dollar military that we have. I think Trump will get, if he does get elected, I do believe that the terrorists in the world will back off. I do believe that he will cut all funding to Iran, and he'll actually try to enforce the sanctions and so on and so forth. And I do think that he does like Israel far more than he considers any of the militant Islamic groups. So I think Trump is pro-Israel. I think he's definitely not a guy who's consistent and logical all the time, but we just got to look at his actions.
Marco, Richard?
Yeah, for sure. I think Well, there's a number of ways you can approach this, to be honest. One of the problems is that people want to take two different approaches when talking about Trump. So either they want to take Trump out of context and treat him against some ideal candidate that's running against him, and therefore he's an epic fail, as he should be. Or the other thing that they're often keen to do is to wish that some other candidate was going to come up with the Republican Party instead. Well, he is the Republican Party. You know, that ship, the alternative for somebody else to be running it, that ship has sailed or sunk, depending on how you put it. So this is where we're at. So we are looking at a choice between these two, and both are relevant when considering either, because that is the election that's going to take place in November. And unusually, we obviously have a fair bit of information about what each would do in the role, because they both either hold the role or have held the role, which is very unusual in an American election. So instead of it just being talk and bluster, which it often is in the run-up to a campaign, but added to that, of course, you've got the fact that Trump is a lot of talk and bluster. So when preparing for this episode and looking into both candidates, etc., that you could easily pull out a whole load of quotes of Trump saying positive things about Israel, but I see little point in quoting those because it's what he's actually going to do that is important. And the difficulty when assessing Trump is that he is very whim focused, emotionalist and whim focused. And that's an antithetical to people like us who are trying to analyze something from the basis of objectivity and reason. But of course, on the other side, we have to acknowledge that Biden is not exactly in full control of his mental faculties. And is he the one running the presidency? And therefore, who is running the presidency and who would run his second presidency were he to be re-elected? Because that would determine his policy towards Israel and whether the public face of his policy, as well as what's said behind the scenes, would continue to diverge, as they have done quite a bit so far. So all of that is necessary when assessing the full picture.
Yeah. Would I want Trump to be a Washington or a Lincoln? Hell yeah. Would I like Trump to be a principled guy, more coherent, more logical, more honest? Yes, of course I would. Unfortunately, that's what we're left with. That he is one of the two candidates who's going to probably be president of the United States. So when you hear him talk, especially when he's at a rally, you're watching a showman. I mean, Trump is a showman. He's very well familiar with how the media works and how to send the other side into a hypoplastic fit. He knows exactly where to stick his finger and make the other side squirm and make headlines. He knows how to be in the news, and he clearly enjoys that. In a way, it reminds me of similar politicians, Silvio Berlusconi. He was another guy who knew how to play the other side, who knew how to get on the headlines. And Trump, when he does these rallies, he says all sorts of stuff. But the point is that if you take him at face value, if you listen to what he actually says, it's not what he actually going to deliver once is in office. Again, I totally agree with what Michael said. Just look at the fact. You can't try and interpret Trump. You just have to look at the facts. Trump moved the embassy into Jerusalem. Trump flattened ISIS. Within a few months, he got to the Oval Office. What did Biden do? He withdrew from Afghanistan, leaving behind billions in high-tech equipment, who, of course, has been used. They're not going to leave it there to rot. Trump made America energy independent. What did Biden do? He scrapped all the pipelines and made America depending still on Iran and Russia oil and gas. What did he do with Abraham Accord? He tried to make Israel independent from the attacks of the countries around it. he tried to normalize the relationship between the countries. And of course, you can agree that that's not the right way, or that might lead to something wrong, but that's fine. Trump defunded UNRWA. What did Biden do? Funded UNRWA straight away. Biden stopped shipping weapons to Israel while he's at war with Hamas.
Well, he said he would. Whether he actually has done is again, who runs the Biden premiership? But yes,
sure. But all this stuff makes you wonder. Well, yeah, you can listen to Trump and believe what he says, and therefore make him like a deranged guy, or you can actually look at what he did. I strongly believe that although some of his policies are a bit ropey from his interviews and from the rallies, you could also argue that once he's in the Oval Office, once he's got the year of the generals, once he's briefed properly, he will actually turn down the rhetoric, will be less bombastic, be less hyperbolic, and perhaps be a bit more presidential. Not much, he's still Trump, but that's what we got.
Yeah. So before, maybe a couple of weeks ago, I might have been inclined to say that whatever else was wrong with Trump, probably Trump is going to be far better on Israel than Biden is. And it could still plan out that Trump will be better on Israel. And that doesn't take an awful lot, I have to say, to be better than Biden on Israel. However, there was an interesting clip which I sent to you guys where he was at a rally. I'm not exactly sure where it was, but the guys behind him start chanting "Genocide Joe," which is the idea that Joe Biden is facilitating a genocide in Israel by not condemning enough Netanyahu, by stopping funding to Israel and this kind of stuff. And what was interesting and revealing about what Trump then did was he sort of, turned around to look at them, paced up and down the stage a little bit and started nodding and saying, they're not wrong. Now, do I think that Trump has a really kind of in-depth kind of view about whether genocide is going on in Gaza? No, not really. I think it's more just the fact that his base is shouting something and I seem to be lagging. Can you guys hear me okay?
Just about,
breaking up a bit, yeah.
Okay. So I think probably it's more just him being reactive to the people behind him and just going anywhere the wind blows. And I think what should be, a potential worry about a second-term Trump presidency is that if that's how he acts in office, and if the American right sort of shifts more to an anti-Israel perspective, then he might be pushed in that direction as well. And fundamentally, you guys are right that it's not like any of the preceding presidents have had exactly a really articulated foreign policy. Anything that could really be called a consistent policy at all. Nothing like Jefferson's inaugural speech where he speaks about not entangling alliances or anything like that. Because in that kind of view, there's a really articulated understanding of what American interests would be. But I think that kind of fundamental lack of principle and willingness to just be kind of pushed by where the base is going, I think is something that should be worrying for a second-term Trump foreign policy, particularly in relation to Israel. Michael, do you agree? Do you think that he might shift? I mean, the American right traditionally, I think, is thought of as being pro-Israel, but are there signs of that shifting, or is this rally just a kind of one-off?
Yeah, I don't think so, for a couple reasons. One is I could well imagine Trump in the heat of the moment and his showmanship, and I completely agree with what Marco and Richard said. And I think you guys put it really well. He gets all hyped up. He's just on a rant, and he hears anything negative about Biden, he's going to repeat it. He probably didn't think for a second Genocide Joe refers to the far, far left. I hate calling them progressive because they're actually anything but progressive, but the far, far left crazy people. He probably at the moment didn't think about it, and I could well imagine the debrief that they probably had afterwards, where they said, you were that was an anti-Israel comment, and he probably no, that was just them panning Biden because he's such an idiot that genocides are going on all over the world because Joe Biden doesn't do anything about it. I think that remember always that none of this stuff is in a vacuum, right? So being anti-Israel is being pro-Iran. there's a lot of people who want to split hairs and suggest that it isn't. It's the same baloney we hear about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. It's complete, utter crap. If you're anti-Israel, you are pro-Islamic militants. There's not a single Arab country, forget about the Islamic militants, the Arab countries, there's just no democracies in the Arab countries. There aren't. And there are some good Arab countries relative to the other Arab countries. But you know, when you're arguing about whether women should have a right to drive, never mind whether they have to wear headgear or not, that's not democracy. That's not about liberty. That's not about any of the Western values that we hold. So anybody who's anti-Israel is pro-Islamic militant. They are. And that's generally an Iran/ISIS/Al-Qaeda axis. And I truly believe that Trump is one of the most ardent enemies of that entire axis that we have. I think he was probably stronger than the Bushes. I think clearly the Obama-Biden are nothing but appeasers. They seem to like Iran. They seem to think that, you know, being nice to Iran and all their disciples is a good thing. Like you said about energy, it's absurd what has happened to America with energy. The fact that gas prices have skyrocketed here because we're no longer independent. We'd rather have people pollute like Venezuela and Iran producing oil where they pollute a lot more than you're even allowed to in America, and produce oil that way, which we are buying, and destroying the climate more. But that's okay because someone else is doing it. And that's kind of the Biden thing. So every aspect of Biden's approach to Iran and their disciples, as you said, the way we pulled out of Afghanistan, which of course is as Taliban country / Al-Qaeda, ISIS. Remember, Obama didn't fight ISIS. He did what we did in Vietnam and Korea. He put one hand behind our back, and he had more rules about how we were fighting ISIS than you could win a war with, and therefore it took a long time. Look how we're fighting the Houthis. It's a disaster. So I don't see that happening with Trump. I think if Trump were president, I think he would tell Netanyahu to just level Gaza. I think he would tell him to level southern Lebanon. He would scream it. He would pull out of the UNRWA in 2 seconds. He will scream at the UN that the UN is supposed to be guarding southern Lebanon. That's a UN resolution. But instead, they're putting Israel on lists that kill children. So I really don't think it's going to be a problem.
I certainly think there's the potential for Trump to be quite good on UNRWA, given that he showed a proclivity to want to withdraw from all these kind of international groups, particularly, he's critical of the UN, he's critical of NATO in various respects. That would be a good thing if Trump really pulled all the UNRWA funding and kept that up. That would definitely be a good thing for Israel in the long run. So I'll definitely give him that. Marco, Richard?
Yeah. I looked again at that clip, and I looked at the actual speech at the convention. It was in Pennsylvania, in a unpronounceable town, I think. The people at the back were shouting "Genocide Joe," and he kind of looked at them a bit amused, and then went along saying, "Yeah, they're not wrong." But what looks to me like, but bear in mind that this gathering of these speeches that Trump does in front of his pro-Trump people are not designed to change people's mind. People turn up to these rallies, they already like Trump, they're already going to vote for him. And so they just go there for a spectacle, for the kindergarten kind of tribalism going on, calling the other side names and that kind of stuff, Crazy Nancy, Crooked Joe, and all this kind of stuff. And Genocide Joe is the latest, if you like, calling names, because the pro-Hamas side not happy that Joe is against Israel enough, they call him Genocide Joe. So the Trump supporters are using this jibe effectively, originated by the pro-Hamas side against Biden, in order to have something else to shout at Biden about. So I don't really think it's got nothing to do with genocide, nothing to do with what Trump's point and attitude would be towards Israel. To be fair, I can't remember Trump ever talking about genocide at any point. So probably doesn't even know the meaning of the word. But then again, I do not think that he will be swayed to change his policy. As Michael was saying, he's very much pro-Israel, and being against Israel comes with a massive package. His supporters, the MAGA people, will never side with the Islamic side against Israel. So I don't think that's going to happen. The isolationism we seem to see coming from the Republicans probably will be noisy enough to ask for a reduction of expenditure towards Ukraine. But then again, I'm pretty convinced that when he's in the Oval Office, when he sees the facts, when he's briefed on what's going on, he will not come on the side of Putin. Already, it's debatable how much he likes to mingle with tyrants and dictators. We've seen him before, and he likes to show himself as, I'll stand up to these people. Look at me, I'll just go there, work out a deal and sort things out. However, when it comes to Biden, to Putin, he will be aware that you cannot negotiate with Putin, and so he will. I'm pretty convinced it will come down on the right side, protecting Ukraine.
Yeah, taking the rallies. I mean, it's like a pre-wrestling match type talk in one of those rallies. That's how I see it, like a WWE type of thing. And that's about making sure that his voter base turns out. Now, both candidates are looking to win Michigan, and Michigan's obviously a key state to securing the presidency. So both of them are going to tread a bit of a fine line at the moment in order to try and secure as many votes as they can in Michigan. And of course, you've obviously got the concentration of Muslims within places like Dearborn and Hamtramck. Now, at the same time, you've got people who come from those areas who shout "Death to America" on the streets of America. Now, if you think that Trump is going to associate with that ultimately, then that just doesn't stack up. What he might do, and what he probably is doing at the moment, is try and keep everyone on side in order to get as many votes as possible. So if there are Muslims who are frankly pissed off and fed up with Biden's policy towards Palestine, then he will quite happily keep it a bit vague and maybe secure some Muslim votes temporarily. But that doesn't mean he's going to suddenly pivot towards his policy being pro Islam and which is ultimately anti-American. So I just don't see that at all. And of course, the point about him withdrawing from defunding UNRWA and being prepared to pull out, threaten to pull out, and sometimes pull out of major agreements and accords and possibly international bodies. He's got the track record for that, like the Paris Accord, for example. Now, there are lots of candidates and presidents in the past who have said that kind of thing and not backed it up. And he has proven that he would back it up. So I can well see a future where things like the ICC and the ICJ, if they start to get too big for their boots and suddenly want to put Trump on their list of war criminals, as they've already done for Netanyahu and stuff, they may well try that kind of thing, emboldened as they are by the desire to stop Trump or at every possibility. I could see him moving towards withdrawing from those. That's a possibility. It's hard to say, but certainly the peace through strength policy, the idea that Trump is an unknown and strong threat towards a lot of the countries that walk all over America when Biden is in the White House, that can't be ignored.
I don't know if I agree, Marco, that I think he'll come down on the the Ukrainian side, which I think is what you said. We haven't maybe gotten all into Ukraine yet, but I think there's a lot of signs that he might go the other way. But I just wanted to ask Michael, so, we were talking a bit about Michigan there, and obviously that's a key one that Biden needs to win. So obviously there's a kind of two-party system with Biden and the Republicans, but these kind of Muslim voters that Biden needs to win over, is it really plausible that they would then go to the Republicans if they're dissatisfied with Biden? Like how is that going to work out if Biden has really annoyed them in his policy towards Israel? Like how for us ignorant people in the UK, how does that play out?
Well, there's a kind of, I mean, Americans are not known for their brilliance sometimes, and I think generally, and I think this notion that they would either not vote or they would vote for an independent party candidate just to show him, that's unfortunately how people are. Now there have been some very bright commentators in America that just say don't vote for Trump, even though they clearly vote. Clearly, they're more on the side of Trump than on anything Biden has done, and particularly on the philosophy behind what Biden has done, which we have talked about a lot. Obviously, a non-vote doesn't help Biden at all, and it only helps Trump in those situations. And I could well see people doing that because there's a very weird thing in America where I just don't like the guy. I mean, now I'm talking a little bit more about people who would be Republicans except for the candidate, and that's a different species than the one you're talking about, Morgan. But as far as Democrats are concerned, or Muslims, they don't have really a choice. They either vote for Biden or they're basically voting effectively for Trump.
Okay, and then we have a couple of super chats. We have $5 from Megan. Thank you very much, Megan. Who says manipulators like Trump and Biden are easily manipulated. Maybe we'd do better to write to POTUS, praising the man strong enough to stand with Israel. And then we have $4 from Jonathan. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Okay, so maybe we should, we started expanding a bit already, but what does the second term Trump presidency hold for wider foreign policy then? So on Ukraine, in relation to China, obviously Russia, then all these kind of things. Because the worrying thing in the first Trump presidency, that there is this discussed factor, as you were kind of saying, Richard, that he was seen as a bit of a live wire, not exactly predictable about what he was going to do, which obviously has negative aspects because he showed friendliness towards various dictatorships. Like he welcomed Sisi into the White House, and unfortunately that made Obama look like a principled person who would never welcome him there. But then there's also this kind of idea that he clamped down on those more violent anti-American forces. So what do you guys think about what a second Trump term presidency holds for those kind of things?
Yeah, I think in virtue of his pragmatism, he probably thinks he can strike some sort of deal with these kind of people, and that in a way is to his disadvantage and to his advantage in a way. Unfortunately, we know that they giving a photo opportunity to a dictator is never a good idea. You never show it like a Xi Jinping or the Korean guy, Kim Jong-un, standing next to the United States of America's president, or let alone shaking his hand. That's wrong, strategically wrong and morally wrong. However, when it comes to other people, I mean, bear in mind, Xi Jinping was here in Europe, was visiting France and other countries here in Europe just a few days ago. So there is, unfortunately, the Western world is dealing with these kind of dictators. And it would be nice if we had the backbone to say, sorry, you do your own thing there. We can live without you. We can drive our own economy, perhaps not to the full of the powerful free trade deal across the world, but we're just going to live a life in freedom. And if you decide to follow a path of freedom and proper trading with people, fine. But as long as you are a dictator, well, you can do your own thing with the other dictators in the world. I'm sure you're not going to be alone. However, Trump seems to he already did the stopping trade with China. He stopped the subsidies. So under a point of view, you kind of sees that dealing with China is not a good idea for certain areas. And then at the same time, in order to get what he wants, he tries to talk to China on a diplomatic basis. But overall, I think he realizes that there's so much you can do. Bear in mind that Trump is not the guy who's necessarily setting the policy. He might well say we're gonna do this, but then you're facing it with the civil servants. There is a orthodoxy in the Department of State. Is it called the Department of State? Whereby certain rule, a certain procedure will not be broken. It's the same here, like the Foreign Office in Britain. Things don't happen just because the Prime Minister wants them to happen, but they only happen if civil servants and the diplomats allow you to do it. So, under the point of view, I'm not too worried. Things like breaking accords, like the NATO one or the Iran accords, or Richard mentioned the Paris ones. Well, you always do that because he wants to renegotiate them. If he sees something he doesn't like, he just comes out on an accord with the excuse of renegotiating. Did it with Canada, did it with the Trump's Pacific one and other things. So in a way, it's not going to be like he's going to declare war to the world.
And I think that's the way his foreign policy often works, isn't it? People take the USA's involvement and inclusion for granted. They trust in the altruism of the USA to make sure they won't walk away. And Trump is prepared to say, no, we do a decent deal, or we amend this deal, or you cough up some money for your part of NATO or whatever, and then we can move forward. So all of that is certainly relevant here. I think it's impossible not to huff and puff when you're talking about Trump, because he is exasperating, and even though you hope for the best, you also know the worst elements of him, and it's which side of that you choose to focus on in many ways. I think sticking with Israel for a second. If you ask the questions, what would you want the US president to do in relation to Israel, for example, I can come up with a bunch of things. You want them to give unequivocal moral support to Israel. You want them to show possibly military support, or at least the threat of it, depending on escalation within the region. You want to show, the sale of weaponry, the sharing of intelligence, those kind of things. You want them to show pressure on the on the US's allies, not to capitulate to Hamas, and in order to keep the Western reaction strong in relation to Israel. And you want them to do that with some kind of authority, some kind of clout and moral authority. But this is where we get to the difficulty with Trump, is that moral authority is not something he has in the eyes of the other Western allies, for example. And often they will simply take the opposite line to Trump, even if he happens to be right on a particular issue, simply because it is Trump. So the fact that Trump is making the right argument doesn't always mean that it gets the right outcome, because he's not listened to because of who he is and because of the worst elements of his character and his standing within on the international stage in the eyes of many of the people who can't stand the sight of him. So all of that makes it very difficult, I think. I think in terms of the title of this essay, just to stick to Israel for just a bit longer, was "Will Trump's Presidency Save Israel?" Now, again, there's various ways of looking at that, because Israel's got to save itself for a start, and it's got to be 100% behind itself and its own moral authority, and it's got to lead the way by being certain and strong on that. And any gaps in that certitude and conviction in its own right to defend itself will quickly prize apart support for it from any other countries in Europe or in the US presidency. So will Trump's presidency save Israel? Will it save it from itself? Will it save it from its own altruism? Will it save it from being wiped off the map? Will it save it from Hezbollah and Hamas attacks in the future? Will it save it from the academic Marxists in all the Western colleges that attack it under the erroneous charge of colonialism and all that? Those are big questions that lead in 15 different directions. But they're all relevant. But it's Israel's role in itself, as well as who's in the White House, that's important. And I think we've only got hints as to what either would do. But I think on balance, you really do have to say that Trump will be a stronger supporter of Israel than Biden has been. Is that enough? Well, not in an ideal world, but this is the world we're all in. So we've got to suck it up.
We have a super chat just on what you were kind of asking from Christian for €5, saying, is this debate not senseless? Israel needs to win this year, not next year, waiting for Trump to finish Hamas and Hezbollah. And that's certainly true. And I doubt that if Trump comes into office, whatever kind of fear he can instill in the Islamic radicals in the world, if he really can do that, I would be very surprised if he was to commit. Because, Christian, you're saying about finishing Hamas and Hezbollah. I doubt military support is going to be what he engages in with Israel, just for the tendency, the America First tendency. I'd be surprised if his supporters really wanted kind of American boys to be at risk of dying to attack Hamas and Hezbollah. But Michael, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, a couple of great comments from Marco and Richard. I think we get the people we can elect, and of course we have two people that I don't think anybody's thrilled with. But it's very important for the electorates to all realize that you can believe anything you want, but reality always wins, hence the name of the show. Angela Merkel we should not forget the stunning stupidity of this woman for exactly the reasons that you guys were talking about, that she hated Trump. Never mind that he called her on her NATO dues, which Germany hadn't been paying at all, and the United States and its infinite stupidity just continued to foot everybody's bills. And Germany, who certainly had the economic wherewithal to pay their bill, just didn't do it. And why would they? And no one can blame them. If the US was willing to do it, sure, why not? So she ended up, remember what she did with the energy policy in Germany. She hated Trump so much that instead of buying gas from the US, which had a vast excess of gas and was exporting gas and oil, she went and got in bed with Vladimir Putin. Now, this caused immeasurable harm to Germany when the Ukraine war broke out, and Germany was caught being dependent on one of the worst dictatorships, autocracies in the world. To your guys' point, you cannot get in bed with these people because tomorrow they're your enemy. And she, this was the leader of Western Europe. And I'm very vocal on this because we all wish and kind of hope, but at the end of the day, philosophy of reality, objectivism, if you will, reality always wins. Putin screwed them. And if you remember, he threatened to shut off all gas to Germany during the winter, which could have been catastrophic. Now, we don't all know what the details are of how it was worked out and what exactly happened and so on. But we all need to remember that we do have to elect officials that can get on the stage and they can say whatever they want, but they've got to go with what's right in the end. If they hate the guy, that's fine. You got to do what's right. This is why you gotta just swallow hard with Trump. You got to put earplugs in. And you got to get into the negotiating room and do a deal and do the right thing. I don't think I'll just switch gears. So that was that part. But I think on the issue of American support, Israel, I don't think Israel needs any help with soldiers. I mean, the number of reservists that Israel has is the number that we see. I can tell you, living there, and my son is in the reserves, and he's right now on the border with Syria, having missiles almost daily. And this is Syria, which is the good border, because Lebanon is the really bad border. The number of reservists is underrepresented in the media. There's plenty plenty of soldiers. And ironically, in Israel, unlike most places, reservists actually like to fight there. It's terrible for the economy because you have especially a lot of startups where they're decimated. Their executive team are all on the front lines, literally, which you would never imagine in Europe or America. The point is that we don't need American bodies. We need American munitions. We need some American know-how, but frankly, Israel shares, my understanding, is that Israel shares about as much technological breakthroughs with US as vice versa, despite the fact that it's smaller because its economy is so threatened by war that it basically spends a great deal of money on research and development of advanced weapons. So I think there's a pretty good exchange, certainly, and we know Iron Dome and David Sling and so on were developed jointly, and now the laser guided, which they don't like to talk about because it's scarily effective for missiles, for taking out missiles, and very cheap, were developed together. So what we need is what you guys said is we need some leadership in the world with absolute moral clarity that Hamas is evil, full stop. Israel is not perfect, but Hamas is evil. ISIS is evil. Al-Qaeda is evil. Okay, and this we do not hear from almost any leader in the world. There's a few leaders that have the guts to get up there and say, we stand by Israel. They were attacked. They need to eliminate the people who attacked them. And this is what is lacking in America. And it does boil down to our horrible, horrible universities. A lot of our public education system is infested with these anarchist, holier than thou, bitter teachers who just think that saying pretty much America is horrible and we need to pay reparations for slavery, my God, and let everybody into our borders and screw the taxpayers. That's basically their position. We need some moral clarity in America. It's not that hard. Perfection does not equate with being bad, meaning or good, meaning every country has its problems. There is good, there is evil, call it.
I have an anecdote about the energy independence I can't resist but tell. But there was just one clarification, Michael. You said something around the energy independence that with Trump you have to swallow hard and make a deal. What exactly were you referring to there? Just making a deal with who?
Right. I mean, leaders in the world, they have to just, they got to realize that America is a good country. It's one of the best countries. It's certainly, of the large countries, it's the best country of the large. I mean, there are other countries that are probably morally a little bit more together, but for 330 disparate million people from all countries in the world that live here, we're doing pretty well, and we generally want to do pretty well. And of course, all of our politicians are corrupt, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, of course. And so is pretty much, that's the way it goes. But we need to distinguish all that from we are a democracy that was founded on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we're striving to that. And I don't understand for the life of me why leaders in the free world, they can get up there and tell their people that they don't like Trump or whatever, but at the end of the day, you go behind closed doors and you do the deals that need to get done, and you do them with America, not with China, not with Russia, obviously not North Korea. You don't buy oil from Iran behind the scenes. You don't buy weapons from people that shouldn't be making any money from you, and so on. That's what I meant. Do the right thing. If your population needs to hear you spout off about how righteous you are and how horrible Trump is, if that's what you need to do, fine. But do the right thing for your country, or you end up like Merkel, basically putting Germany into a real, that is disgraceful for a Western country to potentially be out of gas during the winter. Think about it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we felt that here in the UK, and that story in 2014 when I was doing my GCSEs, I remember sitting in physics class. My physics teacher was talking to me about the power grid. And he was explaining about how we get almost like a third, I want to say, of our electricity during peak times from France. And, patriotically, how terrible, relying on the French. But he was saying, if the prime ministers don't really get on this in 7 or 8 years, and if they aren't really getting on building nuclear power plants, we're going to have a real energy crisis in this country. And then we see Putin invade Russia, and suddenly everyone's terrified of their electricity bill going through the roof. And oh my God, where are we going to get energy from? And my physics teacher, Mr. Lewis, he's not a geopolitical genius, right? He was a secondary school teacher, and so if he can have the foresight to see that this is going to cause a real problem for us, the politicians certainly can't. And so there's a real dereliction of duty there in that independence on Russia and on all of these awful dictatorships. Marco, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, just talk about tragedy. The next winter is going to be the first winter when Britain will not have a coal-fired backup system. So if the wind turbine in the middle of the sea and the solar panel in the middle of winter in Britain don't produce enough energy, we will not have a fossil fuel backup system which will supply the energy that we need. We will have to import it from France. And of course, what does France do? In 2022, I think, the EU had the highest import of liquefied natural gas from Russia. From 22, already a year into the Ukrainian war, the EU was purchasing more liquefied gas than it ever did. Really? Is that the kind of world we want to live in? Because the environment has priority, therefore we have to go in bed with Putin. The thing is just ridiculous. And of course, there is right now there is the EU election here. Well, not here in Britain, thankfully, because we left the racket, but in continental Europe, there is right now an election going on, and people will be wondering come Monday or Tuesday why the population of Europe turns towards the right. It's because that's the outcome of turning left is done. When you start reducing people's freedom, when you start making living standard worse in the name of some god of the environment or this kind of crap, people will swing back. And if the alternative is voted to the right, they will vote to the right. And that's tragic in a way, but that's exactly a consequence of the stupid policy that we've been following until now. And you're right, Michael. If the people in the Western world, the ally of America, refuse to sit down with the president of the United States because they're high and mighty and they think that favoring Xi Jinping or Putin is better than dealing with the leader of the world, well, then we are lost, significantly lost.
Yeah, I think I can't resist my own pop at Merkel just briefly. I know it's an aside, but here we go. I mean, Merkel, the argument is that Trump does things based on whim. Well, I don't see much more whim based on after the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan, Germany making the decision to stop its nuclear power when tidal waves aren't much of a threat in landlocked Germany. But that's a fact you choose to evade, and you concentrate on the nuclear power without an alternative. You don't prepare for an alternative. You just leap towards something you think is currently preferable. And of course, when Trump was closing the border to China during the COVID period to try and stop the virus spreading, he was called a racist. And yet, of course, now in the revisionist period, when people look back at the COVID years and the lockdown years, etc., they talk about we should have shut borders earlier. So there's that hypocrisy that runs through a lot of the arguments to Trump, even when he's right. I think at the moment, there's clearly an awareness. It's difficult to know, really, as an individual citizen without the intelligence and the full picture. But there's an awareness that World War III is perhaps more present than it's been for some time, maybe since the Cuban Missile Crisis, who can say to what extent. But it's that every country is currently looking at its military strategy, whether it's got sufficient people and equipment for the future threat. Now, whether that is scaremongering, whether it's genuine concern, how likely it is, all of those very difficult to ascertain. And of course, things like, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Israel, they have the potential to be the first dominoes in such a scenario. We don't know yet. But who is going to be best placed to stop Iran from getting nuclear capabilities? Because that, to my mind, that is the real leap towards a World War III. And I cannot see the answer being Biden to that question.
Certainly, Trump was harsher on Iran than Biden was, and Biden's acted disgracefully on that kind of thing. But in relation to Ukraine, what I remember of Trump's first, period in office, and we're assuming there's going to be a second one, but assuming for the purpose of conversation, there's going to be a second one. I remember him being actually no, God, Ukraine wasn't even going on in his first time in office. God, it shows you how memory plays tricks with you. But Trump has been sort of condemnatory, it seems, of Ukraine in various respects, and maybe this is reflective of his kind of cozying up to Putin whilst he was in office. So, if Trump assumes the presidency in November, what do you guys think this holds for Ukraine? Because I'm genuinely of the opinion that Ukraine very much deserves moral support from the West, and they're providing a very good bulwark against Putin in Eastern Europe. So, do you think Trump is just going to be saying things which are kind of isolationist and appealing to his base, or do you think there's going to be are we going to see a lack of funding? Because I think in the US system, can the funding go through even without Trump support coming from the Congress? Like, how do you think that's going to work? Michael, maybe you can tell us.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's way over my head. I mean, I think it becomes very difficult to fund something substantial without the president's executive signature on it. It's just tough. I mean, Congress is supposed to, pass the laws and so on, and the executive office is supposed to initiate these things. So to have some sort of initiated something out of Congress that doesn't require the president's signature, or almost impossible to overcome a veto these days, because the Congress both houses are so divided. I don't see that. I'm hopeful that that Trump's view on the world is that a strong America is good for the world. I personally believe one of the reasons the world is sort of devolving and people are doing what they're doing, bad actors are doing what they're doing, is because we have essentially nobody in the White House. I mean, we don't have a foreign policy in America except a defense. It's what happened to Israel is so telling. That's Biden's policy. We're talking about the Houthis, this group of idiots from a little piece of crap off the coast of Saudi, below Saudi Arabia and Yemen, that are terrorizing the Red Sea route. And it's absurd. I think if Trump gets into office, I hope he'll clean that up. Although we don't lose a lot of money in the U.S. from that. Egypt loses a ton of money. A lot of places lose a lot more money. But of course, it's U.S. and U.K. that are fighting that one on behalf of everybody. But they're not fighting it. I mean, it's a Biden fight, which is we're gentle. We go in there and we find out where there's no terrorists, and we drop a couple bombs onto some launching sites, and they move the launch sites and so on. I hope that he will realize that we have to give moral support to Ukraine. I hope that we will continue to give them, sell them munitions and advanced equipment, and hopefully that thing will tire Putin out. I think if Trump, if he does get in, doesn't stand up to Putin, there'll be a domino effect. Why not? Why wouldn't Putin try to recapitulate the USSR? That's clearly what he's starting to do. And if we don't stop him, no one's going to stop him.
Yeah. Marco, Richard, what do you think about what a second term Trump holds for Ukraine?
Yeah, to be honest, I hope he would come on the side of Ukraine quite heavily, if anything else, because once he's in office, he's going to be briefed on the fact that Ukraine was convinced by the UK and the US to give up its nuclear deterrent in the 90s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, in exchange for protection from the United States and the US. So I think right now he's not really aware of the facts that Ukraine decided not to have nuclear weapons because the US promised to protect it in case of invasion. So I think when he realizes that, he will see the point that Ukraine has to be defended, if anything else, because America, if it doesn't stand up to its agreement with potential allies, then it will realize there's no point having America at all. You effectively open yourself to all sorts of back deals and stuff like that. Also, part of the problem with the Houthis, just to pick up Michael's point, is that right now our foreign secretary is David Cameron, the very man who decided to build power station in cooperation with China here in Britain. I mean, can you think of something more stupid than giving China the keys to your nuclear power supply? It's just idiotic. So I wouldn't expect any sort of better response against the Houthis. Yeah, you could flatten them in an afternoon if you wanted to, the same way as Israel should have done with Gaza. But the Houthis are much smaller and they haven't got any particular strategic support or anything. So you could just flatten them overnight. But we choose not to do that. Yeah, I hope that Ukraine will actually be protected by the United States, because already it was pathetic during the first months of the Biden administration, the first weeks even. You had this kind of drip news that Putin is putting equipment and people on the border of Ukraine. And it wasn't organized a Tea Party, it wasn't organized a camping expedition. It was clearly trying to invade. So why on earth didn't Biden tell him, guy, if you're crossing the border, you're going to get at least the biggest sanction ever. Biden let Ukraine happen. So hopefully Trump will be better under this point of view.
And just quickly then on Ukraine, I don't think you can separate what happens in the US from what happens in Europe towards Ukraine as the months go by. And as we go into up to November and on into the next year, because already the European leaders, Macron, Schulz, and presumably Keir Starmer, as it'll be in the UK, I don't see them necessarily holding the line of full support for Ukraine, particularly when I think they already Macron talks out both sides of his mouth in any situation, and this is no different. So I'm sure that there will be pressure on Ukraine to give up territory to Russia and negotiate an end to it. Now, that's not desirable. I don't want to see that, but I think it's highly possible that could happen. Now, whether a US president can stop that from happening or will encourage it to go in one way or the other, it's difficult to say. It's difficult to know. As Marco said, I support what Marco said there. I would hope that Trump would see the importance of supporting Ukraine against Russian invasion, not least for the precedent that it sets, as you say, for other countries, for the Belarus and all the rest, and the fact that this problem is not going to go away with appeasement any more than Hitler went away when Chamberlain appeased. So the lessons are there. Time will tell.
And on top of everything, if you don't get tough with Putin, you're effectively telling Xi Jinping to take over Taiwan. He already walked into Hong Kong and nobody said anything in the West. That's disgraceful.
Yes. Unfortunately, I don't know. I still worry about Trump, just given the positive comments he made about Putin. But I agree with you that I certainly hope that he would be tough with Putin if he were to come into a second term. But we'll see. As for the title of the episode, I think we've probably concluded that whatever effect the Trump presidency might have on Israel, it's Israel who has to save itself, and they're the real driving factor in all of this. So and as someone was saying earlier it was Christopher actually who was saying Israel can't wait till next year. That's certainly true, but given the pace of the conflict at the moment, unfortunately, I was one of the people who was thinking we might be finished within 100 days or 200 days, but it looks like it might be dragging out into next year, unbelievably as that is. So depressing times, folks. I should just say on TDO, I said that TRS Extra was coming up tomorrow. I was getting my days mixed up, thinking we're on Saturday. That's going to be on Sunday, so you guys can all join us for that. But we will be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective. So I hope you guys all join us then. Thank you very much for watching. Bye. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.